Hello, hello, hello. Good morning and welcome back. I guess how do we want to start the conversation about breakups? I don't have an entry point in my head yet.
Hmm. I know. I'm like conjuring up all the breakups in my life.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
where to begin?
Where to
It's like
start?
EMDR. Go back to the touchstone.
Yeah, the touchstone. Okay, well, here's a softball. Have we all been broken up with? Yes, for me. Have y'all not been broken up with?
Well, in all fairness, I
Yeah.
have never had a serious boyfriend until my fiance.
Okay.
So, or a boyfriend
Yeah.
really at all until
Okay.
then.
Okay. Maybe just like rejection
Mm-hmm. For
by a
sure.
love interest. Maybe
Oh,
that can be more broad than
tons
a
of
serious.
rejection.
Okay. Okay. Great.
I have been on a dating app.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That'll do
Yes.
it.
I am good friends with rejection. Yeah. Okay. Any stories we're willing to share? You don't have to.
Oh God. Let me think.
I feel like there's always the classic of like in college, and there's like the person they're like, they want to date me, and they don't want to, like, girl, they don't want to date you. That's not what they're into. That's like not what they're doing.
Mixed
I feel like,
signals.
uh-huh. I feel like that's a really popular one. Um, that's probably my uh, what?
No, maybe not. I had a huge crush on this guy in college,
Mm.
and I was like, we're gonna date, like this is it. And then winter break happens, so like we take our finals, and then we both just like stop speaking to each other. I was like,
No more.
oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. How did you feel about that?
Uh, Confused,
Uh-huh.
sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my ego was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ghost
Yeah.
is always just, it's brutal. Oh,
The ghost hurts. Oh my God. The
Because
ghost really hurts.
the ghost leaves so many questions.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
The ghost leaves a lot of questions. Um, but I feel like the emotions you're describing sounds very similar to what a breakup is anyway, of
Yeah.
like the initial like kind of shock, feeling sad about it and grieving it. I feel like the rejection kind of takes a side road of like embarrassment or just like,
Hmm.
oh my God, I'm gonna like crawl under a rock for like 3 to 5 days kind of a feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when, like, I think so many times when we're going through a breakup of any sorts, it's like you want clarity and you want answers and you want
Mhm.
thinking that, like, those answers and that clarity is going to lead to like closure and you're going to be able to, like, okay, like, all good. I'm fine, you know? But like when those answers, when we go looking for those answers, a lot of times it hurts more because then it's like, well, why? It's like, well,
Mhm.
yeah, you're too high maintenance or you're asking for too much, or, it very much becomes then when we ask for why, I think a lot of times it becomes, um, it opens the door for more hurt because then it's like there are qualities about us that are being put on display of like, oh, like
Mhm.
these are the things that I didn't like about you. And while hindsight's always 2020 and you can say, well, if you're not able, if those qualities are not it for you, there's someone that like will be totally fine and will love those qualities about me. When it's
Yeah.
happening in the moment, it certainly does not feel that way.
Yeah.
And when I think about like the word rejection, the second word that comes to mind is shame, right? Of like, this means
Yeah.
something about me, and the meaning that we take away from that of because this person doesn't think that I'm enough, or they think I'm high maintenance, or whatever it is, like that we give meaning to that to make that true, and we let them decide. And I think that's the hard part about a breakup, right? Is this is someone that I care about, that I thought cared about me, that I like and I love them, if that's the
Yeah.
case, and now they're rejecting me, and how painful that is.
Totally. I would say this is a topic that I run into relatively often with clients. Like whether they're the one initiating the breakup, they're on the receiving end of a breakup. Like I feel like in any given moment, someone on my caseload is going through that kind of a thing. Do y'all feel like the frequency lines up there for y'all?
Yeah. Or just like, I mean, even if it's not a romantic breakup, I think grief in general of just like the loss of a relationship of some sort.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. It can come
Um,
in many different forms, even if
yeah.
we're thinking like friendships or in jobs. I think of like we're getting rejected from jobs
Yeah.
or grad school, or like there's so many areas of life that we can experience rejection.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. I think there's, I don't, this just popped in my head, but there's always been, I feel like a trend on social media of the concept of like going back till you hate them.
Ooh,
Tell
say
me
more. I don't
more.
think I know about that.
Like, in terms, this is more like romantic breakup coded, but the idea of like, um, going back to someone over and over and over again.
Hmm.
And the idea is like you go back and you get more information every time. And so you just go back until
Oh,
you hate them, until you're finally like, you know what? Okay, I'm done. I've had enough. Um,
yeah. You get the information you need.
it's always been a very interesting concept for me that I've always laughed at, but also simultaneously been like,
Oh, I feel like I have so many thoughts on that. Like, like when is it enough? Like, when do you have enough information, and would it ever
mm-hmm,
feel like enough to like wrap it up in a bow and be like, okay, I'm going to put this away now?
mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm.
can also imagine that there are cases that at one point you're like, okay, I'm so irritated, I'm so resentful, I'm so frustrated, I'm so angry, I'm done. But
Yeah.
like, what it would take to get to that point.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I feel like to move through life, no one is immune to that experience of grief or of loss on some level. And I think y'all already highlighted the different ways beyond breakups, romantic or otherwise, that can happen. I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm like, if we're looking at like a neuropsych, like neurochemical level, do you think our brains really know the difference between like a breakup or a job loss or a parent loss? Like, is the grief felt the same, you think?
I think,
None of us are like
mm,
psychologists, so it's okay to not know the answer. I think I'm curious about
I
that.
think the only thing that I can think of that might differ is the attachment.
Mm,
I think that's where my brain goes of like the attachment that you have to like a person, um, which feels like more still within the realm of ambiguous loss if we're talking about grief, but kind of more um, also concrete loss in the way of like, oh, this person obviously has not passed away. They are alive, but they are no longer
right,
in my life. So
right.
it feels like a cross between like ambiguous and concrete grief. Whereas like the loss of a job, I don't know if the like maybe the attachment level is there. Maybe it's been like the job that you
Mm,
dreamed about since you were a little kid. But um that
yeah.
feels more ambiguous in the sense of like, oh, the grief of what I thought my future might be.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, which shows up in a breakup for sure. And also with a breakup, it feels like there's this attachment to this one person that might be really, really strong.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Maybe
don't know.
walk us through ambiguous versus concrete because people might not know the difference.
So, we think about grief a lot of times, and I feel like we reserve grief only for like someone has died, but we experience all different types of grief in our life in a lot of different ways. And so the idea of concrete loss is like someone has passed away, like someone that was alive is no longer alive, like they are physically gone. And so that is kind of what I learned is referred to as concrete loss. And then you have other types of grief. The two big ones I learned were anticipatory grief and ambiguous grief. And so ambiguous grief is more of like a symbolic loss of like, okay, like the person might still be here, but I am grieving our relationship in the sense of like, it will never be the same as it was. Um, you think about getting married and the things that you go through when you're married to someone, ambiguous loss, God forbid you ever have a miscarriage or lose a child, or the ambiguous loss of like, I never knew this person, but they are gone and now I'm grieving the fact that like, I will not know this kid. Ambiguous loss, with jobs and grad schools and all those types of things. So it's more symbolic loss of like, okay, someone might still be alive, or it might not be like a concrete type of loss, but I am still experiencing grief in the sense of like, I am grieving the fact that this will now no longer be my future, or my life now looks different. My life won't include this thing. And then we look at anticipatory loss a lot of times. If you have a loved one that gets like terminally ill, knowing that like you are experiencing grief, even though the person is still there, but that there is going to be a future where they are no longer there.
Yeah.
And so experiencing grief in kind of like before the person has passed. Yeah.
It's a really beautiful explanation of that. I understood the concepts, but hearing you kind of lay it out that way is really cool. I guess, do you feel like that's both of you? This is a question for y'all of like, do you feel like people what's the way I want to ask that? Do you feel like there's misconceptions about grief held by the public of what you are allowed to grieve, what you shouldn't be allowed to grieve?
Totally. I think people experience disenfranchised grief all the time, you grieve, what's a good example? Your parent or someone is in prison for murdering someone, right? And they pass away. That feels like disenfranchised grief in the sense of like, disenfranchised grief is the things that society kind of tells you should not be grieving because they're a bad person or because they did this bad thing or XYZ. And yet you're still experiencing it anyways. And it's that kind of grief that feels like I should not be. It's not right for me to be feeling this.
It reminds me of this book that I read, and I don't know if this answers your question, but it said your loss will always be, don't quote me on this, your loss will always be the worst loss, right? Like your experience of it. And I think a lot of time we get to this comparison game of this person lost this important person in their life, and therefore I can't feel grief over the loss of my dog or disenfranchised, right? And so I think thinking of it as everyone has their own experience with grief, and there's no wrong way to do it. Like every feeling that you experience is okay. And I think why we don't talk about grief as much is because people don't know what to say. There's almost this discomfort, and I hear a lot of people say, like, how do I support someone who's grieving?
Yeah.
And the reality is there's no way to fix that, right? There's nothing that we can say or do to take that feeling away. And so sometimes people feel uncomfortable by that. I feel like I can't find the right thing to say or the right thing to do. And therefore we just don't talk about it, which leaves people feeling isolated in grief. And to know that, and I say this often, like there's no right thing to say. There's nothing to take it away, but how can you show up and support someone? And really the most helpful thing with grief is having someone walk alongside you to hear you and support you through like the daily tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that I talk a lot with my clients when they're experiencing grief is the idea of just someone bearing witness to it
Mhm.
and not slapping a platitude on it, not slapping a,
Mhm.
well, they're in a better place, or, like, well, you know, they didn't treat you well, so,
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, that's not
or
helpful.
like, there's going to be like someone so much better for you that's just like waiting
Right.
for you. And it's like, okay, well,
Right.
there was a point not too long ago where I thought that that was this person.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I need to feel the grief of this before I can get to a point where I'm like, okay, like, there's someone that is better for me out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's hard is that people already know that. Like, okay, I
Yeah.
understand, like, I didn't deserve this, or I understand that, like, I'm gonna find the right person.
Hmm.
But exactly to your point, Ryan, like, I need to grieve this
Yeah.
because I thought it was this person,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
2 days ago.
I think the biggest thing with grief that we run into a lot of times is that the people who probably really want to support us while we are navigating grief is the discomfort that people feel with not being able to do something about it. You know,
Mhm.
like we are grieving, and if the only thing that I tell someone they can do is just be here with me, just like bear witness to my pain, bear witness to my grief, and don't
Mhm.
try to fix it, don't try to do anything about it. One, the people that truly, truly love us and support us and want to be there for us hate that there's literally nothing that they can do about it. And
Yeah.
also, I think grief is a very visceral, a very guttural feeling. Um, and I think when we experience feelings, if we're experiencing them with another person or we are like expressing them to someone else, they then feel that feeling for a second, or they try and like step into our experience. And if that is
Mhm.
so uncomfortable for them because it brings up their own grief, it brings up their own loss, it brings up whatever it is that it brings up, there's so much discomfort, I think, sometimes around now I'm experiencing this, or I'm imagining what this feels like, or it's drawing on this loss that I had, and
Mhm.
I don't want to go there. And so instead of sitting in that with you, I'm going to shut you down and say, well, at least you have another kid, or, like, well, at least you're able to have kids, or, like Brene
Mhm.
Brown always says, the least empathetic things in the world start with at least.
Totally.
Yeah.
They're in a better place. You slap a platitude on it instead,
Right.
and in doing so, you completely invalidate that person's grief, and you ruptured the relationship in a way, because now
Totally.
the person who's grieving says, okay, you're not someone that can sit with me in this right now. And so I'm
Mhm.
not going to continue to go to you because you have
Right.
taught me that you can't handle it.
Right. Right. Have we all read It's Okay That You're Not Okay? We all sound pretty familiar
That's the
with
book that, yeah, when I said this is a quote from the
the
book.
concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. It is
That's a
like
great book.
such a game changer for grief on any scale. But that is exactly kind of the point that I'll explain to clients when they're like, it sucks when my friends are like, they're just like trying to throw like sunshine and rainbows at it and it doesn't help. And like it makes me feel worse and I don't understand why. And it's like exactly what you're saying, Erin. It doesn't take the pain away. It makes it feel less safe to go to them to talk about it anymore. Like you just withdraw further from them. No, oh, what? You
Sorry,
said,
I was like, sorry, I did not want to
yeah.
interrupt, but it almost invalidates the grief, right? If someone's telling you those things, and like people take the meaning away of like, it's not okay that I feel this way. And I think that's the really painful part. And I did not mean
Yeah.
to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence.
No, 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 no. I'm glad you said that. It is really invalidating, I think, and that, like Erin said, causes rupture, I think,
Yeah.
in the relationships that are left in the wake of a loss, which can feel even worse. So
To be
knowing that that
experiencing, oh,
is true.
to be experiencing.
Guys.
Sorry, Madeline.
Let me say it. No.
It's like to be experiencing a loss and then to feel like you are incurring losses upon losses.
Yeah.
Right. That's really painful. And
Go on.
thank you. Okay. What the thing that I'm trying to say is, no, I'm kidding. Knowing that that concept is true and being the therapist sitting with clients who are bringing their loss to you, bringing their grief to you, bringing their breakup to you, whatever it is. How do you put that into practice as a therapist? Because we're also people that sometimes want to fix it and want to throw rainbows at it. And it takes, for me, a really conscious effort to be like, that is not my job. They don't need me to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I notice this when my clients are grieving, but also when my clients are just struggling. I learned and was called out by professors like multiple times when I would like have to show a session or something that I had a really bad habit of trying to rescue my clients from their feelings, like trying to rescue my clients from what they were going through. And so I will kind of name it sometimes of like, I am noticing right now that like I really want to I want to do or say something, anything to like take this away from you, to like make it better. And I also know like that is the human in me. The human in me that cares about you really, really wants to just like find a way to take this away from you to make it all better. And also, I know that there's nothing that I can do or say right now that is going to achieve that.
Yeah.
And so I just want you to know that, like, I see your pain. I see your grief. I see the rejection. I see whatever it is, kind of naming whatever feeling or emotion it is that they're experiencing. And like, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it, but just like sit in it and allow it to exist. Yeah.
I think in that same approach, you kind of posture yourself as someone who is safe to bring their grief to because you're not trying to fix it. And that feels almost counterintuitive, I think, in a societal kind of norm sense. But that is really the more helpful thing, I think, when we're the one who's experiencing grief to find solace in someone who's not trying to fix it for us, but just is, like you're saying, bearing witness to it and letting it be there, letting it be felt.
Yeah. Because I think so much of the work of grief is, you know, you have like the acute period of grief where it is like the days, weeks, months, years, however long that it is for you, that you are experiencing like acute grief of like every single day you're waking up and being reminded and all of these things. And then I feel like a lot of the work of grief after kind of that acute period of time is how do you learn to integrate the grief into your life? Not so much, you know, how do I like move on from loss? I always talk to my clients a lot more about like, it's not about moving on and like leaving it. You're never like the losses that we experience are always going to be a part of us. And so, how can we learn to integrate it into our life in a way where we are able to remember fondly like the love that existed, and which is the reason why the grief is there in the first place, is because love was there first. And so, how can we learn to integrate that into our life on a daily basis where it doesn't just feel like the grief is debilitating, um, and allow space and grace for the days when like we bump up against our grief on anniversaries, on like reminders, things we love, or whatever it is, a song comes on. So I feel like more of my work with grief with my clients is like, okay, sitting in it, allowing it to be, and just like feeling it in all of the ways that you need to feel it. And then learning to live again, knowing that this loss is now a part of you and feeling it when it needs to be felt. And, you know, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that thought.
No, I like that thought.
There's a really helpful handout that I use a lot on grief and I forget the name of it, but it's the idea is growing around grief, that the grief's always inside of us. I think a lot of people have this idea, and a lot of people will say like, well, I should be over this by now, or I shouldn't still be thinking about this. And the reality is, similar to what Erin said, right, that it's always going to live inside of us. And some days it's going to feel bigger, and some days it's going to feel smaller, but it won't go away. And so offering yourself compassion in those moments when it does come up, versus telling ourselves we shouldn't feel this way.
Right. I have a little whiteboard that I keep next to my desk to draw. Sometimes it just helps to like draw things out. And that's one that I'll draw out for people a lot, is kind of this idea of like grief being this like giant ball that we have like in a little mason jar. We are the mason jar. And grief is that big. And it's too much. It's too heavy. It's taking up too much space. And I think our natural instinct is to shrink it, to minimize it, to distill it into something smaller. And usually, not even usually, always, I think, the grief that we felt, like Erin is saying, like grief was there because love was there first. Like grief, or the thing that we're grieving, doesn't deserve to be shrunk or minimized or like wiped away. Instead, we need to find a bigger jar. Like the grief can stay the same size, but we need to get a bigger jar. And that happens by continuing to live, continuing to build experiences and new memories, knowing that that grief doesn't deserve to be altered in size, but we can grow around.
Yeah. Kate, there's a therapist on TikTok that I love. Madeline, I think you might know her, Katie.
Oh, Katie, Arizona.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, shout out Katie. She did a TikTok that I loved about grief, and it was, she had this like glass Pyrex, or no, I think it was just like a long rectangular Tupperware, but I think it started out as a square, and it was like she was putting all these little things in, and I was like, this is your grief. And as you're moving throughout your life, like the Tupperware moves around, and like you're running into your grief in like all of these different ways. And in acute grief, it feels like the space is so small, and as you're moving around, like you're bumping into your grief at every turn. But then as you grow and you have more experiences and you continue to live your life, like the Tupperware gets bigger, right? So you might not run into your grief as much, like as you're moving throughout your life. And that doesn't mean that you're forgetting the person. It just means that you're growing. The grief is still there, and you will still inevitably run into it. It will hit the edges. But I loved that. And I did it with a client one time. I like was scrambling. I was like, I got a glass Pyrex thing and like a tiny little, like, I think I got my AirPods case. I was just like, and then as you're growing, you're getting bigger. But
yeah, I love that. A demonstration is always nice. I think that grief is unavoidable. I think that's something that all of us will experience in our lives. And so that's a topic that I think is relevant for therapists to kind of become acquainted with.
Totally.
And I know that, it's something that I said this already, but like we as people handle grief differently than we as therapists.
Yeah.
And I think that now knowing what I know about grief has kind of changed the way that I show up for people in my own life that are grieving.
Because grief and loss are the one thing that, like, it's going to touch everyone.
Yeah.
Like, everyone in your life will experience grief. Everyone in your life will experience a loss of some sort. And I think the one thing that also is important to note is that, like, I really let my clients have their defense mechanisms when they're first experiencing grief, of like, I'll let you have that. I am a very firm believer of like, your body will tell you when it's ready to process something. Your body will, like, grief will wait for you until you are ready, I think is the saying. And so if my clients are experiencing grief and like they want to be angry or they want to just completely like avoid it and shut down, like, I'm not gonna push that. I'm just like, yeah, like this sucks. Or like, yeah, like let's just like not talk about that right now. I'm not gonna be like, well, you're experiencing grief and we really need to like process it. Yeah. I think that's the only other thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm glad we were able to kind of talk about our thoughts on it. I feel like if anyone listening has experienced grief or is currently experiencing grief, it's something, not to pitch therapy, but I'm like, it's something that therapy is sometimes really helpful for, and having a space to feel it and not have it minimized or, thrown any kind of band-aid fix over can feel so healing. So I would say if that sounds anything like you, maybe try therapy or bring it up if you haven't already to your
Yeah.
therapist.
I'm laughing that we were like, we're gonna do a breakup episode.
Uh,
We're all therapists, and now at the
we
end of
kind
the
of
episode, we're like, and grief will wait for you until your body's ready.
it comes for us all. Yeah. Well, so yeah, breakups fit into that category 1000%. And I think we were able to kind of find the common thread between breakups and what I think majority of the population will experience at some point, which is loss and grief. And not to pivot back, but we did have a really interesting question related to breakups. Let me find it. Okay, so somebody asked, you've talked on the pod about clients breaking up with their therapists, but have you ever broken up with a client before? Either because you didn't think you were the right therapist for their needs or because you didn't get a good vibe from them? Fair question. I feel like this is a little bit tricky to answer, to like maintain confidentiality, like to not give any descriptive information. But I would say I've definitely been in situations where I'm like, oh, this person needs a type of therapy or a skill set that I know I'm not equipped to offer. And I think
on
that's the
top
only
of that, or I am private practice or, outpatient care is not the level of care that this person needs right now.
Yeah.
I cannot offer them the support that they need. They need to like seek a higher level of care where they can be more supported, kind of more of that wraparound care if you have more of like a treatment team. And having that conversation and being like, I will still be here, I'm not going anywhere. But I think ethically the like level of care comes in too.
Totally. What does that feel like from an attachment standpoint to have to kind of be the one to sever that tie between you and a client?
Awful.
Okay, I was gonna say it's yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's like, I think a lot is talked about like clients' attachment to their therapist, but I think there's also like the other side of that equation that is like we get attached to our clients as well. Like we are not immune from feelings of attachment with our clients, and so it definitely sucks.
Yeah.
And to want to be what they need and to not have that skill set or not be able to provide that, I think that's really painful too. The level of vulnerability it takes for someone to like come and do all of the paperwork and come to an intake appointment, like how hard that is to say. I'm sure, feels like a rupture in that relationship, and also hoping and trying to help them navigate getting the care that they need after. Like that follow-up care is really important.
Totally. I think that therapy breakups are, at least looking at it from a therapist standpoint, we have a lot of, at least in Texas, a lot of like ethical guidelines around it. Like if you feel like you are seeing a client just for like funsies and like not a ton of progress is being made anymore, or it's just like a source of income for you and there's not a ton of work being done, like ethically, we have to reevaluate at that point and either find something new to work on or cut you loose kind of thing. Or if it's like, I recognize ethically that like maybe this person is not, it just doesn't feel like we're quite the right fit. Like we don't totally vibe. I bet they can get better care elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's our obligation to tell them and to like help them, not help them find it necessarily, but offer referrals. And that's definitely something I've run into of like,
Yeah.
Love you to death. I'd love to keep working with you. I don't know if I'm going to be the right person for you.
Yeah. I feel like ethically in Texas, scope of practice is like a huge, huge thing.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes. If the question is, have you ever ended a therapeutic relationship with a client? Yes. It sucks. I hate doing that. And yet I have to do that by my licensure to make sure that that person is getting the right care. And if it's not me and I can't make a reasonable effort to like change my skills in that area, or I know someone who's immediately going to be a better fit, like, yeah, that's just the direction we got to go. But that sneaky attachment, she pops up everywhere, doesn't she? But yeah, I'd say that's. Do we have other thoughts on that question or feedback or thoughts there?
I don't think so. I think other than like, know that if your therapist has made this decision and this has happened to you on the client side, it has not been without a ton of thought and a ton, especially if you have an established therapeutic relationship of like, is there anything, anything that I can do, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of like my scope of practice, my skill set? Is there anything that I can do before, you know, I have to end this therapeutic relationship? So, know that it is not without a lot of thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And client abandonment is also something that reminds me of. I'll have people that are like, yeah, my therapist just like ghosted me. Like she just literally never texted me back or just like never showed up to session, and like having no closure on that. Like if that feels like a breakup to you, that's very different, I think. Like that's where it's not ethical. That's not cool. That's not the way it should go. And yeah, there's like very clear guidelines on how to follow through with that process, and you have to give referrals, and you can't just not not show up to session and just like cut them off. But it sounds like people do that. Therapists do that. I've heard stories. So please don't do that. And if you're a client that happened to, you can report them. Not trying to get anyone in trouble, but that is so unethical. So whatever. Don't shoot the messenger. Other thoughts, feelings, questions?
No, I think that was good.
Okay. All right. Well, we will be back next week. And yeah, keep asking questions. And we will see you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.